On a cold winter night in New York, Jason Carter, a man who had lost everything, did something most people wouldn't. He saw a stranger, a woman bundled in a worn-out coat, sitting alone in the freezing air. She had nothing, no money, no place to go, and yet, instead of looking away like the rest of the world, Jason did the one thing that would change his life forever. He offered her a hot meal. What he didn't know was that this woman wasn't who she seemed to be, and what started as a simple act of kindness would lead to a revelation that would shake Jason's world to its core, because the woman he thought was homeless was actually a billionaire searching for something money could never buy: true kindness. What happens when two people from opposite worlds collide? Will Jason accept the truth when he finally learns who she really is, and when she offers him a second chance at the dream he thought was lost? Will he take it? This is a story about kindness, redemption, and the power of second chances. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Before we begin, if you love stories that touch the heart, stories about hope, love, and the unexpected turns of fate, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because here we believe that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Now sit back, get comfortable, and let's dive into From a Free Meal to True Love. Hardworking waiter helps a homeless woman, unaware she's a billionaire, testing true kindness. The neon sign of Millie's Diner flickered against the cold New York night, casting a dim, bluish glow onto the slushy sidewalk. The December wind howled through the streets, making the city feel harsher, colder, especially for those who had nowhere to go. Inside the diner, Jason Carter, a man in his late 30s, wiped down the counter with slow, practiced motions. His calloused hands moved methodically, the faint scent of coffee and grease clinging to his skin. This wasn't the life he had envisioned for himself, not after years of hard work, ambition, and a dream that had once burned brightly. He used to own his own cafe, a cozy little place where people could sit for hours, sipping on handcrafted lattes while he played old jazz records in the background. But timing had been cruel. The economy had shifted. The rent had soared. And before he knew it, he was drowning in debt. The cafe closed, and Jason found himself starting over, but this time, not as an owner, but as a man serving plates in someone else's establishment. Despite everything, he wasn't bitter. Life was hard, but he had seen enough to know that it was harder for others. Just as he placed a fresh pot of coffee on the burner, the diner's bell jingled. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of frigid air, and a figure bundled up in layers of mismatched clothing. A woman, hunched against the cold, her hood pulled low over her face, hesitated at the entrance. Jason observed her silently. She wasn't like the other late-night customers. Truck drivers grabbing coffee before a long haul, tired office workers stopping in for a meal after an exhausting shift. No, this woman looked lost, like she didn't quite belong anywhere. She shuffled inside, her hands tucked deep into her coat pockets, her shoulders curling inward as if trying to disappear. She glanced around, her eyes darting from table to table, then slowly made her way toward a booth near the window. Jason watched as she sat down stiffly. She didn't remove her hood. She didn't reach for a menu. She simply sat there, staring at the tabletop as if trying to will food into existence. He had seen this before. Without a word, Jason grabbed a ceramic mug and filled it with fresh, steaming coffee. He approached her booth, placing the mug in front of her. "It's on the house," he said casually. The woman flinched at the sound of his voice, her head jerking up just enough for him to catch a glimpse of startling green eyes, sharp, intelligent, but guarded. She hesitated, her voice raspy, either from the cold or from lack of use. "I don't have any money," Jason shrugged. Didn't ask if you did. For a moment she didn't move. Then, hesitantly, she wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, as if it were the first bit of comfort she had felt in a long time. He didn't pry, he didn't ask questions. He simply walked back behind the counter and let her have her moment. Jason continued working, pouring coffee for a couple of regulars, cleaning up a booth left in a mess by a group of teenagers. But every now and then, his eyes flickered back to the woman. She sipped the coffee slowly, savoring it in a way most people took for granted. Then, after what seemed like an internal debate, she did something unexpected. She slid out of the booth and made her way toward the counter, stopping just a few feet from Jason. Up close, he noticed how worn her clothes were, the frayed edges of her coat sleeves, the faint smudges of exhaustion under her eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. Jason raised an eyebrow. "I could ask you the same thing." A faint smirk touched her lips. "Emily," he nodded, wiping his hands on a dish towel before offering a handshake. "Jason," she hesitated, but then took his hand briefly. Her grip was firm, not what he expected from someone in her situation. "Why did you give me the coffee?" she asked, her voice softer this time, as if genuinely curious. Jason leaned against the counter. "Because everyone has bad days, and because a cup of coffee isn't going to make or break this place. But maybe it makes yours a little better." Emily stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure him out. Finally, she exhaled and nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Jason didn't expect to see Emily again. Usually when he helped someone, they passed through like ghosts. Here one night, gone the next, swallowed up by the city. But Emily wasn't like most people. The next evening she came back. This time she ordered a bowl of soup. A few nights later she returned again. Slowly the conversation started. Small at first, simple. Where she was from, how long she had been in the city. She never gave too many details, always vague, always careful. But Jason didn't push. Instead, he told his own stories, about the cafe he once owned, the dreams he let slip through his fingers, and Emily listened. One night after finishing her coffee, she asked a question that caught Jason off guard. "If you could do it all over again, would you?" He paused, setting down the plate he had been drying. "What do you mean?" "The cafe. If you had the chance to start over, would you take it?" Jason exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Yeah," he admitted, "but life doesn't work that way. Second chances aren't exactly handed out for free." Emily hummed thoughtfully, staring into her empty mug. "Maybe they are. Maybe you just have to recognize them when they come." Jason chuckled. "Sounds like wishful thinking." But Emily only smiled, a small, knowing smile, as if she held a secret the world hadn't figured out yet. Jason didn't realize it then, but that night marked the beginning of something different, something unexpected, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance had already walked through the doors of Millie's diner without him realizing it. The following evening, as Jason wiped down the diner's counter, he found himself glancing at the door more often than usual. He wasn't expecting anyone in particular. At least, that's what he told himself. Yet when the bell above the entrance jingled and Emily stepped inside, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in him. She looked the same as before, wearing the same oversized coat, the same worn-out boots. But there was something different about the way she carried herself. Tonight, she wasn't hesitant like before. This time, she walked in as if she belonged. Jason didn't comment. He simply grabbed a clean coffee mug and filled it. By the time she reached the counter, it was already there waiting for her. "You came back," he said, handing it over. Emily curled her fingers around the warm ceramic. "I told myself I wouldn't." Jason tilted his head. "And yet here you are." She took a sip before responding. "Turns out I'm bad at keeping promises to myself." Jason smirked. "Good thing I don't charge extra for repeat customers." Emily chuckled, a soft, quiet sound, as if she hadn't laughed in a long time. She slid onto one of the counter stools, her body visibly relaxing. "You're different from most people," she said after a pause. Jason raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She studied him over the rim of her mug. "You don't ask questions, you." "No, people don't want to answer. That a bad thing?" "No." Emily exhaled. "It's rare." Jason didn't press. He simply refilled a ketchup bottle, giving her time to speak if she wanted to. Finally, she broke the silence. "What made you open a cafe?" Jason stilled for a second before setting the ketchup bottle down. It wasn't the question itself that caught him off guard. It was the way she asked it, genuinely curious, as if she actually wanted to know. "Like the idea of a place where people could sit and forget about the world for a while," he admitted. "A good cup of coffee, a quiet corner, a place that felt like home, even if it wasn't." Emily's expression softened. "Sounds nice." Jason chuckled dryly. Yeah, it was. There was a weight to those last two words, and Emily didn't miss it. "What happened?" she asked. Jason hesitated, but then shrugged. "Wrong place, wrong time. Rent skyrocketed, competition got tougher. Before I knew it, I was drowning in debt." Emily tapped a finger against her mug. "Did you fight for it?" "As hard as it could." "But you lost anyway." Jason exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. "Yeah." Emily took another sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving him. "And yet, you're still here, still working in a diner, still being kind to strangers." Jason looked at her bemused. "What's your point?" Emily set her mug down. "Most people get bitter when life knocks them down. You didn't." Jason let out a low chuckle. "Maybe I just don't have the energy for it." Emily shook her head. "No, I think you're one of those people who refuse to stop believing in something good." Jason didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Before he could think of a reply, the bell above the door jingled again, breaking the moment. A couple of teenagers walked in, laughing and shoving each other, oblivious to the rest of the world. Jason welcomed the distraction. "You hungry?" he asked Emily, reaching for an order pad. She hesitated. "I can't pay you." Jason shrugged. "Didn't ask if you could." Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. "You do this for all your customers?" "Only the ones who look like they could use a decent meal." Emily considered him for a long moment, then sighed in resignation. "Fine." "Surprise me," Jason smirked. "Coming right up." The next night, Emily returned again, and the night after that. Each time, their conversations grew longer, more comfortable. She never told him much about herself, her past, where she was from, why she was on the streets. She dodged certain questions with a well-timed smirk or a change of subject, but Jason didn't mind. He was patient. He knew that some people needed time before they were willing to open up. And for some reason, he wanted to give Emily that time. 1. Evening, after finishing her usual coffee, Emily propped her elbow on the counter and rested her chin on her hand. "You ever think about trying again?" Jason frowned. "Trying what again?" "The cafe." Jason let out a dry laugh. "You don't just try again when you lose everything." Emily tapped her fingers against the countertop. "Says who?" Jason shook his head. "It's not that simple." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Maybe it is." Jason stared at her. There was something about the way she said it, like she knew something he didn't, like she saw a version of the world that he had stopped believing in. Before he could respond, she pushed back from the counter, stretching her arms over her head. "All right, Jason Carter," she said with a smirk. "I'll see you tomorrow." Jason arched an eyebrow. "Confident, aren't you?" Emily shrugged. "Like I said, I'm bad at keeping promises to myself." And with that, she walked out into the night. Jason watched her go, a strange feeling, settling in his chest. Emily was different, and he had a feeling that whatever had brought her into his life was only just beginning. The rhythm of Millie's diner had subtly changed. Jason wouldn't admit it out loud, but Emily's presence had become a quiet constant, like the warm glow of the diner's neon sign or the familiar sound of coffee dripping into the pot. She showed up every evening, slipping into her usual seat at the counter as if she had always belonged there, and Jason, despite himself, looked forward to it. Tonight was no different. The late-night crowd had thinned out, leaving only the occasional customer nursing a cup of coffee. Jason was refilling sugar dispensers when Emily strolled in, shaking off the winter chill from her coat. "You're late," he said casually, not looking up. Emily smirked as she slid onto her usual stool. "Didn't know I was on a schedule." Jason poured her coffee without asking. "You're here every night, might as well be clocking in." She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Guess that makes you my boss?" Jason chuckled. "Nah, if I were, I'd be paying you, and I'm pretty sure you'd find a way to negotiate for more." Emily smirked but said nothing. Instead, she took a slow sip, her eyes drifting toward the small chalkboard menu behind the counter. After a moment, she asked, "Did you ever name your cafe?" Jason glanced at her. He hadn't expected the question, but Emily had a way of pulling at the parts of his past he didn't talk about often. "Yeah," he admitted. "It was called Carter's Corner." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a place that had good pie," Jason smirked. "Best pie in the city." "Liar. Swear on my life. My grandma's recipe. Apple crumble." Emily leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "And what made Carter's Corner special?" Jason exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. "It wasn't big, just a small place, a handful of tables, but it had atmosphere. People would come in and stay for hours, reading, working, talking. It felt like—" He hesitated. "Like home?" Emily finished for him. Jason nodded. "Yeah, like home." Emily studied him. "You miss it?" It wasn't a question. Jason leaned against the counter, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping against the stainless steel surface. "Some days more than others." Emily tilted her head. "And if you could start over?" Jason let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "Not that simple." Emily's green eyes lingered on him, as if weighing something. "Maybe it is." Jason narrowed his gaze. "Why do you keep saying that?" Emily shrugged, her lips curving slightly. "Because people like you don't quit. You just get stuck thinking you can't win again." Jason scoffed, grabbing a plate to dry. "You sure talk like someone who's never lost anything." For the first time, Emily's smirk faltered. It was quick, barely a flicker, but Jason caught it. She took another sip of her coffee, looking away. "You'd be surprised." Jason thought about pushing, but something told him that Emily wasn't ready for that conversation, so he let it go. For now. An hour later, the diner had emptied out. The only sound was the faint hum of the radio playing old jazz in the background. Emily was still there, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip. Jason, finishing up for the night, leaned against the counter. "So, what's your story?" Emily didn't look at him. "You mean why I'm here every night drinking free coffee?" Jason smirked. "Something like that." She was quiet for a long time. Then finally she said, "Let's just say things didn't go as planned." Jason waited, but Emily offered nothing more. He could have pushed, but he didn't. He knew better than anyone that some stories weren't meant to be told all at once. Instead, he grabbed a fresh plate and set it in front of her. "Apple crumble," he said simply. Emily blinked. "You had this the whole time?" Jason smirked. "Maybe I was waiting for the right moment." She shook her head but picked up her fork. As she took a bite, her expression changed, just for a second. It was something softer, something he couldn't quite place. Jason didn't comment, but he saw it. And for the first time, he wondered who Emily really was. The next night, Emily didn't show up. Jason told himself he wasn't waiting for her. He had customers, tables to clean, orders to take, but when the door jingled and someone walked in, he found himself looking up too quickly, only to realize it wasn't her. By the time the night ended, there was an odd, empty feeling in his chest. Emily had become a part of the routine, and now, without her, something felt off. Jason shook his head. It wasn't his problem. People came and went. That was how life worked. And yet, when the bell rang the following evening and Emily finally walked through the door again, Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. She looked more tired than usual. Her coat pulled tighter around her body, but she still smiled when she saw him. Jason poured her a coffee before she even sat down. Emily smirked. "Good to know I have a standing order." Jason slid the cup toward her. "You missed a night." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Did you notice?" Jason shrugged. Dinah was quieter. Emily studied him for a moment before taking a sip. For the first time, she said, "Thanks, Jason." Jason simply nodded. Any time, he wasn't sure what had changed, but something had. And as Emily sat there, sipping her coffee, Jason knew one thing. She wasn't just another customer anymore. The evening rush had come and gone, leaving Millie's diner in its usual late-night lull. The hum of the neon sign outside mixed with the quiet clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Jason was rinsing out coffee mugs when he caught a movement near the door. Emily had arrived like clockwork. She slid into her usual seat at the counter, pulling her coat tighter around herself. It wasn't particularly cold inside, but something about her posture felt tense, guarded. Jason noticed immediately. "Coffee?" he asked, grabbing a mug. Emily nodded, but her usual playful smirk was missing. Jason set the cup in front of her and leaned against the counter. "Rough night." Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Nothing I can't handle." She took a slow sip of coffee, but her hands were tight around the mug, like she was anchoring herself to it. Jason didn't push. But he wasn't the only one who had noticed something off. From the back of the diner, Mike, the head cook, emerged with a plate of fries and sat at the counter across from Jason. He was a man in his 50s, with a skeptical eye for strangers, and a general distrust of anyone who didn't have a clear backstory, and he had been watching Emily. "She's been coming in here a lot," Mike muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "You ever wonder why?" Jason bristled. Emily, meanwhile, didn't react. She simply kept sipping her coffee. "What's your point, Mike?" Jason asked, keeping his tone even. Mike wiped his hands on a rag, then motioned toward Emily with his chin. "Just saying you don't know anything about her. She never orders much, always shows up late, and she doesn't exactly look like someone with a steady paycheck." Jason's jaw tightened. Emily finally set her mug down. "You could just ask me," she said. Her voice level but sharp. Mike shrugged. "All right, who are you?" Jason shot Mike a warning glare, but Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she met Mike's gaze head-on. "Just someone passing through." Mike snorted. "Passing through where? The sidewalk?" That was too much. Jason set down the dish he had been drying a little too hard, the sound sharp against the counter. "That's enough, Mike." Mike held up his hands. "Hey, I'm just looking out for you. People don't just wander into places like this every night without a reason." Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. Jason exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He knew Mike wasn't trying to be cruel. He was old school, the kind of guy who had seen too much of the world to trust easily, but that didn't mean Jason agreed with him. Emily stood up. Jason instinctively reached out, his hand lightly brushing against her sleeve. "Emily, you don't have to. It's fine." Her voice was calm, but Jason saw something flicker in her expression, something like hurt. She pulled her coat around herself and walked toward the door. Jason hesitated for only a second before following her outside. The moment Jason stepped outside, the air hit him, crisp and laced with the distant scent of rain. Emily stood near the curb, her hands deep in her coat pockets. She wasn't leaving, not really. She was just standing there, staring at the empty Street, Jason came up beside her. "Mike's an idiot," he said. Emily let out a soft chuckle, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's not wrong, though." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily tilted her head, looking at him. "You don't know anything about me." Jason leaned against the diner's brick wall. "I know enough." Emily let out a breath, watching it curl into the night air. "Do you?" Jason crossed his arms. "I know you appreciate good coffee. I know you listen more than you speak. And I know that when people push you, you push back just enough to make them second-guess themselves." Emily looked at him then. Really looked at him. Jason met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I don't need to know everything about you to know that you're not a problem." Emily exhaled, slow. For the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed just a little. "You're a strange guy, Jason Carter." Jason smirked. "That's what they tell me." Emily shook her head, but smiled just barely. She turned back toward the street, staring at the rows of flickering streetlights. After a long moment, she said, "I grew up in a place where trust wasn't free." Jason didn't reply. He just waited. Emily's fingers brushed against the strap of her coat. "Maybe that's why I don't know what to do when someone gives it to me so easily." Jason let that sit between them for a beat. Then he said simply, "Well, lucky for you, I'm not charging." Emily let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Generous of you." Jason smiled. "What can I say? It's a good business model." Emily looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, Jason thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe him. Back inside, Mike gave Jason a look when he walked in alone. Jason ignored him. A few minutes later, the door jingled again. Emily walked back in. She slid into her usual seat at the counter. Jason didn't say anything. He just poured her another cup of coffee and slid it toward her. Emily curled her hands around it, then glanced up at him. "Thanks, Jason." Jason nodded. "Any time." And just like that, something had shifted. Not much, but enough. Jason had spent enough time around people to recognize when someone was running from something. Emily? She wasn't just passing through, she was hiding. It wasn't just the way she avoided certain questions or how she dodged conversations that went too deep. It was the way she watched people, as if she expected someone to recognize her, as if she were bracing for the moment someone finally called her out. And tonight, Jason saw it more clearly than ever. It started when a new customer walked in. The diner was in its usual late-night rhythm, low chatter, the occasional clink of silverware. Jason was topping off a regular's coffee when the door jingled, and a man in a tailored coat stepped inside. He was different from the usual crowd. Clean-cut, mid-40s, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a high-rise office, not a midnight diner. Jason barely noticed him at first, but Emily did. Her entire posture changed. Her grip on her coffee mug tightened. Her shoulders went stiff, and for the first time since she had started coming in, she looked like she was about to bolt. Jason frowned, following her gaze to the man. He was just scanning the menu, oblivious to Emily's reaction. Jason lowered his voice. "You okay?" Emily snapped her attention back to him, but there was something guarded in her expression. "Yeah, just tired." Jason didn't buy it. "You sure?" Emily forced a smirk. "What, worried I'm going to stiff you on the bill?" Jason didn't smile. "No, worried you're about to disappear." Something flickered across her face, but before she could respond, the man at the door moved toward a booth. Emily immediately turned her head away, staring down at her coffee as if willing herself to disappear. Jason didn't push. But now he knew for sure Emily was lying to him. She didn't leave immediately, though Jason could tell she wanted to. She sat there, stirring her coffee for longer than usual, eyes flicking to the window every so often. Watching the man from the corner of her vision, Jason could practically hear the internal war raging in her head. Finally, she exhaled and reached for her coat. "I should get going." Jason leaned against the counter. "Want me to walk you out?" Emily hesitated. It was just for a second, but Jason saw it. "I can handle myself," she said lightly. Jason didn't doubt that. But that wasn't the point. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her and stood up, sliding out of the diner before Jason could say anything else. And just like that, she was gone. 15 minutes later, Jason stepped outside for a break. It had started to drizzle. The streets slick with rain, reflecting the glow of passing headlights. He expected silence. What he didn't expect was Emily, standing at the alley beside the diner, her back pressed against the brick wall. Jason frowned, stepping closer. "Emily?" She didn't move. She was breathing a little too hard, hands clenched into fists at her sides. Jason knew that look. Fear. Not the kind of fear that came from something small. The kind that came from something you couldn't outrun. "What happened?" Jason asked, keeping his voice even. Emily shook her head. "Nothing. She exhaled sharply. "I just needed a second." Jason studied her. "You sure?" She nodded quickly. Too quickly. Jason didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he leaned against the wall beside her, letting the quiet settle between them. After a long pause, Emily finally spoke. "I know what you're thinking." Jason glanced at her. "Do you?" "Yeah." She let out a dry laugh. "You think I'm running from something?" Jason didn't answer. Emily exhaled. "I'm not." That was the first lie. Jason knew it. Emily knew it. But neither of them said anything about it. Instead, Jason shrugged. "All right," Emily turned to him, surprised. "That's it? You're not going to push?" Jason shook his head. "Nope." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Why not?" Jason smirked. "Because whatever it is, you'll tell me when you're ready." Emily stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide if she believed him. Finally, she exhaled. "You're a strange guy, Jason Carter." Jason chuckled. "Yeah, so I've been told." Emily let out a breath, her shoulders finally loosening just a little, and for now, that was enough. Emily eventually walked away, disappearing into the city, but something was different this time. Jason watched her go, his mind racing. She had lied to him, that much was clear, but the real question wasn't why she lied. It was who or what she was hiding from. And for the first time since meeting her, Jason wasn't sure if he was supposed to protect her or let her go before he got in too deep. Jason Carter had learned not to expect much from people. Life had taught him that people came and went, some quickly, some slowly, but always inevitably. Still, when he walked into Millie's diner the next evening, he found himself scanning the booths and counter seats as if expecting Emily to already be there. She wasn't. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she had something to do. But as the hours stretched on, that familiar empty seat at the counter gnawed at him. And for the first time since meeting her, Jason realized something unsettling. He was worried. By midnight, the diner had slowed to its usual late-night crawl. Mike, the head cook, leaned against the pass-through window, arms crossed. "Your friend didn't show up tonight?" Jason didn't look up from the coffee pot he was refilling. "Not my friend," Mike snorted. "Right, just someone who happens to take up permanent residence at that counter every night." Jason ignored him. Mike tilted his head. "Maybe she finally moved on. You ever think about that?" Jason frowned, his grip tightening around the coffee pot handle. Mike noticed. "Huh, so you do care?" Jason exhaled, setting the pot down. "Just seems off. That's all," Mike shrugged. "Women like that, they don't stay in one place too long." Jason didn't respond, but something about that sentence bothered him. Women like that, what did that even mean? And more importantly, was it true? By the time Jason's shift ended, the worry had settled into his chest like a weight. He wasn't the kind of guy who chased ghosts. People made their own choices. They left when they wanted to, but Emily wasn't like most people, and deep down, Jason knew she hadn't left because she wanted to, which was why, instead of heading straight home, he found himself walking the route she usually took after leaving the diner. The night was cold, the streets slick with rain. The city hummed around him, car horns in the distance, the occasional burst of laughter from a late-night crowd. He passed a bus stop, an alleyway, a few closed storefronts. Nothing. But then, near an old bookstore, something caught his eye. Scarf. Emily's scarf. It was lying on the pavement, damp from the rain. Jason stilled. He bent down, picking it up. The fabric was soft, still carrying the faintest trace of Emily's scent. Coffee and something floral. She had been here, but the question was, where was she now? Jason stood there for a moment, gripping the scarf in his hand, scanning the street. For any sign of her, nothing. The unease curled tighter in his gut. He had no reason to be this concerned. Emily wasn't his responsibility, but that didn't stop him from feeling like something was wrong, something very wrong. He glanced at the darkened bookstore. The door was locked. The windows reflected nothing but the glow of streetlights. He turned to the alleyway beside it. It was empty, but the feeling didn't leave. Something had happened here. Jason didn't know how he knew. He just did, and that realization left him standing in the middle of the sidewalk, gripping a scarf, wondering why the hell he suddenly felt like he had lost something important. Emily didn't come back the next night, or the night after that. Jason told himself to stop looking, to stop checking the door every time the diner bell jingled, to stop waiting, but he couldn't, because somewhere out there, Emily was gone, and Jason had no idea if she was ever coming back. The week dragged on without a sign of Emily. Jason told himself he should stop thinking about her. He had no real reason to worry. No logical excuse for how much space she had taken up in his thoughts. She was just another person passing through, but logic didn't explain why he found himself looking up every time the bell above the diner's door jingled, or why the scarf he had found near the bookstore was still tucked in the pocket of his jacket. Something had happened to Emily, and Jason had no way of finding out what, until she walked back into the diner. It was late, past midnight. The diner was nearly empty except for a few regulars. Jason was cleaning up when the door creaked open, and there she was, Emily. Jason stilled. She looked different. Her coat was pulled tight around her body, but he could still see the bruises, a faint discoloration along the edge of her jaw, a cut near her temple. Jason set down the coffee pot slowly. Emily's green eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, she looked uncertain. She hesitated. Then, without a word, she slid onto her usual stool at the counter. Jason walked toward her, his movements careful. "You want coffee?" he asked, his voice even. Emily exhaled, like she had been holding her breath. "Yeah," Jason poured. Emily wrapped her hands around the mug, staring down into the dark liquid like it held answers. Jason leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You gonna tell me what happened?" Emily's fingers tightened around the cup. "It's nothing." Jason let out a slow breath. "That's a lie." Emily flinched, just barely. Jason had seen enough people in bad situations to recognize when someone was hiding the truth. Emily had been gone for a week. Now she was back with bruises and silence, and Jason had never been good at letting things go. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said, voice calm. "But I need to know, are you in danger?" Emily's grip on the mug tightened. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow, measured sip of coffee. Finally, she said, "Not anymore." Jason wasn't sure he believed her, but for now, he let it be. For the next 30 minutes, they didn't talk about it. Emily just sat there, drinking her coffee. Jason went back to work, keeping an eye on her without making it obvious. When he finally slid a plate of food in front of her, she raised an eyebrow. "Didn't order this." "Didn't have to." Emily smirked, but it was weaker than usual. Still, she picked up a fork, a small victory. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something unspoken but understood. Jason didn't push. Emily didn't offer, but for now, she was here, and that was enough. Jason waited until she had finished eating before speaking again. "You have somewhere safe to go?" Emily paused mid-sip. Then carefully, she set her cup down. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Why do you care?" Jason leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter. "Because you disappeared for a week and now you're back. With bruises." Emily inhaled sharply through her nose. Then she shook her head. "I'm fine, Jason." Jason's jaw tightened. "That's not what I asked." Emily sighed. "I have a place." Jason searched her face for any sign that she was lying. She wasn't, but that didn't mean she was telling the whole truth either. "All right," Jason said, nodding slowly. He let it go. For now. The diner had emptied out by the time Jason wiped. Down the last table, Emily was still at the counter, idly spinning her empty coffee mug between her hands. She looked lost. Jason leaned against the counter across from her. "You want to talk about it?" Emily didn't look up. "Not yet." Jason nodded. "Okay." Emily blinked, surprised. "Just like that?" Jason shrugged. "I told you before. You'll tell me when you're ready." Emily stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. She pushed back from the counter, standing up. Jason didn't say anything as she pulled on her coat. But just as she reached the door, he called after her. "Emily." She turned. Jason hesitated for a brief second. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the scarf he had found that night. He held it out to her. Emily's eyes flickered with something. Recognition, surprise, maybe even something softer. She stepped forward, taking the scarf from his hand. For a second, her fingers brushed against his, warm against the cold fabric. Emily swallowed. "You kept it." Jason held her gaze. "Yeah," Emily nodded once. Then, before Jason could say anything else, she turned and walked out the door. Jason watched her disappear into the night, and even though she was gone again, he had a feeling this time she'd be back. The next night, Jason didn't have to wonder if Emily would show up. She did. Like always, she slid onto her usual stool at the counter, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her coat. But something felt different. She wasn't on edge like before. She wasn't avoiding eye contact. Tonight she looked like someone who had made a decision. Jason poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her. "Long day?" he asked. Emily wrapped her fingers around the mug, but instead of answering, she studied him for a moment. "You ever meet someone who sees you before you're ready to be seen?" Jason stilled. It was an odd question, but he understood it immediately. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Yeah," Emily exhaled, staring down at her coffee. "That's you, you know, to me." Jason didn't respond. He just let her keep talking. Emily took a slow sip before setting the mug down. Then, finally, she said it. "My real name is Emily Sinclair." Jason frowned slightly. "Okay." Emily let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You don't recognize it?" Jason shrugged. "Should I?" She smirked. "Maybe, but I kind of like that you don't." Jason narrowed his eyes slightly. "All right, why don't you fill me in?" Emily exhaled. "My father owns Sinclair Global." Jason's brain stuttered. Sinclair Global, one of the biggest private equity firms in the country. In name you couldn't walk past in Manhattan without seeing on a skyscraper. Jason slowly set down the towel he had been using to wipe the counter. "You're saying you're... That's Sinclair?" Emily nodded. Jason exhaled. "Damn," Emily chuckled. "That's about the reaction I expected." Jason shook his head. "You're telling me you're a billionaire's daughter, and you've been sitting here in a worn-out coat drinking free coffee?" Emily smirked. "Not my best disguise, huh?" Jason stared at her. Of all the things he had imagined, this wasn't even close. Jason leaned on the counter, processing everything. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "Why?" Emily looked at him, and for once she didn't hesitate. "Because I needed to know if people were kind when they didn't have a reason to be. Jason's jaw tightened. And what did you find? Emily exhaled, her gaze steady. You! Jason didn't know what to say to that. For the first time since meeting her, Emily looked vulnerable. Not guarded, not teasing, just real. Jason ran, a hand over his jaw. So this whole time you were testing me? Emily shook her head quickly. No, it started that way, maybe, but then it wasn't a test anymore. Jason held her gaze. He wanted to be mad, but he wasn't, because the truth was he had seen her before she told him who she was, and that mattered more. After a long silence, Jason exhaled. All right. Emily raised an eyebrow. All right? Jason smirked. Not the biggest plot twist I've ever heard, but it's up there. Emily laughed, really laughed. Jason shook his head. So what now? You go back to your billionaire life? Emily tilted her head slightly. That depends. Jason frowned. On? Emily hesitated. Then, carefully, she said, on whether or not you'd ever consider starting over. Jason went still. He knew what she meant. She was offering a second chance, a way out of this diner, this routine, this life he had settled for. Jason exhaled, leaning against the counter. You're serious? Emily nodded. Completely. Jason stared at her. He should say no. He wasn't someone who took handouts, but this wasn't just about him. This was about his dream, the cafe he had lost, the thing he had convinced himself he'd never have again. Jason exhaled. Then finally he looked at Emily and said, I don't want your money. Emily blinked. What? Jason smirked. But I'll take something else. Emily narrowed her eyes. What's that? Jason leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter. A date. Emily stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile curved at her lips. Jason Carter, she murmured, shaking her head. You are something else. Jason grinned. Yeah, so I've been told. Emily exhaled, looking at him for a long moment. Then she reached for her coffee. All right, she said, softly. One date. Jason smirked. That's all I need. And just like that, everything changed. Jason had never been the kind of guy to chase opportunities that weren't meant for him. He had learned the hard way that life didn't hand out second chances, that once you lost something, it was gone. But now, Emily Sinclair, billionaire, heir to a fortune, and the same woman who had spent weeks sitting at his diner counter was offering him one, and Jason had no idea what to do with it. The next evening, Jason didn't expect Emily to show up. She had already given him her proposal, and if she was smart, which he knew she was, she'd let him think about it. Still, when the diner's bell jingled and she walked through the door, Jason felt something settle in his chest. She slid into her usual seat, pulled off her gloves, and gave him a look. So have you decided yet? Jason smirked, grabbing a coffee mug. You don't waste time, do you? Emily leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter. You're the one who asked for a date instead of a check. So tell me, Jason. Carter, do we have a deal? Jason chuckled. A date's not a deal. It's a night out. Emily tilted her head. Then consider this your night out before making a decision. Jason raised an eyebrow. So this is a test? Emily shrugged, smirking. Think of it as a preview. Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, one night, but don't expect me to suddenly change my whole life over dinner. Emily smirked. Fair enough. Jason nodded, grabbing a napkin and jotting something down. He slid it across the counter. Pick me up at 7. Emily raised an eyebrow but took the napkin anyway. She glanced down at the address. You live above a bookstore? Jason smirked. Best neighbors in town. Emily chuckled. I'll see you. At 7, then. She stood up, pulled on her gloves, and with one last look at Jason, she walked out the door. And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt like something was about to change. At exactly 7 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up in front of Jason's apartment. He had expected something flashy, maybe a chauffeur, a private driver, but when he stepped outside, Emily was the one behind the wheel. She rolled down the window and smirked. "Get in, Carter." Jason shook his head, chuckling as he slid into the passenger seat. "Nice ride," Emily shrugged. "It gets me from point A to point B." Jason glanced around the car's pristine interior. "Yeah, well, my truck gets me from point A to point B too, but it also leaks oil and makes a noise that I'm pretty sure means it's dying." Emily laughed as she pulled onto the road. "I'll take your word for it." Jason leaned back in his seat. "So where are we going?" Emily smirked. "You'll see." They pulled up in front of a small upscale restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't the kind of place Jason usually found himself in, but it also wasn't one of those over-the-top places where people went just to be seen. It felt intentional. As they walked inside, the hostess greeted Emily by name. "Good to see you again, Miss Sinclair." Jason glanced at Emily. "You come here a lot?" Emily shrugged. "Sometimes. It's quiet. No one here cares about my last name." Jason nodded, taking that in. They were seated at a table near the window, where the city lights cast a warm glow against the glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "All right, Carter. Let's talk." Jason smirked. "Talk about what?" Emily tilted her head. "Why you're so against taking help." Jason exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Because nothing comes without strings." Emily nodded slowly. "You think I'd ask for something in return?" Jason studied her. "Wouldn't you?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her wineglass, swirling the liquid inside before finally saying, "Not everything is a transaction, Jason." Jason wanted to believe that, but life had never worked that way for him. Emily must have seen the doubt in his expression, because she leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. If someone walked into your diner tomorrow and said, 'Hey, I want to help you open your cafe again. No strings, no debt, just because I believe in you,' what would you say?" Jason let out a slow breath. "I'd say they're lying," Emily sighed. "That's the problem with you, Carter. You don't believe in good things." Jason hated that she was right. He ran a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple," Emily smirked. "Maybe it is." They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Then Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table. Jason frowned. "What's this?" Emily leaned back, crossing her arms. "A key?" Jason blinked. "A key to what?" Emily smiled. "A space, a building, something that might look a lot like Carter's Corner if you wanted it to." Jason just stared at her. She had planned this. This whole night wasn't just about dinner. It was about offering him a future. Jason exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't quit, do you?" Emily smirked. "Not when I see something worth fighting for." Jason looked down at the envelope, then back at Emily. This was it, a second chance, a way to reclaim something he thought was gone. But could he take it? Could he really start over? Emily watched him carefully, waiting. Jason exhaled, and for the first time in years he thought, maybe, just maybe. Jason stared at the envelope Emily had slid across the table. It wasn't just a key inside. It was a choice, a chance to step out of the life he had settled into and into something new, something he had thought was gone forever. But taking it meant trusting Emily. And trust? That wasn't something Jason handed out freely. Emily tilted her head, watching him. "You're thinking too hard," Jason exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "That's because I know better than to believe in fairy tales." Emily smirked. "Who said this was a fairy tale?" Jason picked up the envelope, turning it over between his fingers. "What's the catch?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No catch." Jason narrowed his eyes. "There's always a catch." Emily exhaled, setting her wineglass down. "Look, I get it. You don't trust easily. But this isn't about charity, Jason. I'm not handing you money and walking away. I'm giving you an opportunity. What you do with it, that's on you. Jason ran a hand through his hair. And if I say no? Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Then I leave you alone, and you go back to pouring coffee at Millie's for the rest of your life. Jason let out a dry chuckle. Harsh. Emily smirked. Honest. Jason sighed. He looked down at the envelope again. A second chance, a way to reclaim what he had lost. He had spent years telling himself that life didn't work that way, that once something was gone, it stayed gone. But maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Jason exhaled, then slowly slid the envelope into his jacket pocket. Emily's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Jason met her gaze. I'm not saying yes, Emily smirked, but you're not saying no either. Jason shook his head. You really don't quit, do you? Emily chuckled, reaching for her glass again. Not when I see something worth saving. Jason felt something tighten in his chest, because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was worth saving. The next morning, Jason found himself standing outside the address Emily had given him. It was a small, empty cafe space in a quiet part of the city. Large windows, a faded "For Lease" sign hanging in the door. Jason let out a slow breath staring at it. It felt familiar, like walking into a memory of something he had lost. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key from the envelope, and turned it over in his palm. It would be so easy to walk away, to tell himself this wasn't his life anymore. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to. Later that evening, Jason walked into Millie's diner for his shift. Mike, the head cook, glanced up from behind the counter. You're late, Jason smirked. You're grumpy, Mike snorted. Always. He wiped his hands on a rag, then leaned against the counter. Your girl showed up earlier. Jason raised an eyebrow. Emily? Mike nodded. Left you something. Jason frowned. What? Mike grabbed a small notebook from under the counter and slid it toward Jason. Jason hesitated before picking it up. The cover was plain. No title, no markings. Just a simple black notebook. He flipped it open. Inside, on the first page, was a note. Every great cafe starts with a plan. Here's yours, Emily. Jason let out a slow breath. He flipped through the pages, skimming. The handwritten notes inside, floor plans, vendor lists, projected costs. Emily had thought of everything. Jason exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Mike watched him carefully. You gonna tell me what's going on? Jason closed the notebook, tucking it under his arm. Not yet, Mike shook his head. You're a fool if you let this go. Jason let out a small chuckle. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. By the time Jason locked up the diner for the night, his mind was made up. He wasn't afraid of failing. Not anymore, because for the first time in a long time, he had something to believe in, and it wasn't just the cafe. It was her. Jason reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Emily's name. He hesitated for only a second before typing out a message. Let's do this. He hit send. A few moments later, his phone buzzed. Emily's reply was short. About time, Carter. Jason chuckled, shaking his head, and just like that, his life started over. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The soft hum of conversation blended with the gentle clinking of ceramic cups. Sunlight streamed through large front windows, illuminating the wooden tables and the handwritten chalkboard menu. On the wall, Jason Carter stood behind the counter of his cafe. Carter's Corner. It had taken months of work. Long nights, early mornings, paperwork, construction, supply orders, and countless moments where he wondered if he was making a mistake. But now, as he looked around at the space he had built with his own hands, his own vision, he knew it had all been worth it. The grand opening had been small but perfect. Friends, old and new, had shown up to support him. The first customer to walk through the door had been Mike from Millie's Diner, who had grumbled about how Jason was too stubborn for his own good before ordering a black coffee and a slice of apple crumble. The second customer had been Emily. She had walked in like she had always belonged there, her green eyes scanning the cafe with quiet satisfaction before stepping up to the counter. Jason had smirked. "Welcome to Carter's Corner, Miss Sinclair." Emily had arched an eyebrow. "You kept the name." Jason had shrugged. "Of course I did. Some things are worth holding on to." Emily had tilted her head, watching him carefully. Then, after a beat, she had said, "In that case, I'll take the first official cappuccino." Jason had made it himself, pouring the steamed milk with steady hands, feeling something settle in his chest. By the time he handed it to her, Emily had been smiling, really smiling. And in that moment, Jason had realized something. He wasn't just opening a cafe. He was starting over. Now, weeks after the opening, Carter's Corner had become exactly what he had always dreamed of, a place where people could linger over a good cup of coffee, a place where strangers became regulars, a place that felt like home. Jason stood behind the counter, wiping down a mug as Emily walked in. She was a regular now. She came in almost every morning, taking her coffee at the same corner table, always. Watching him with that knowing smirk, she slid onto a stool at the counter, resting her chin in her hand. "Business looks good, Carter." Jason smirked, setting the mug aside. "Not bad for a guy who almost said no." Emily chuckled. "You're welcome, by the way." Jason leaned forward, crossing his arms on the counter. "Is this the part where I say thank you and admit you were right?" Emily arched an eyebrow. "You just did." Jason exhaled, shaking his head. Emily reached for her coffee and took a sip. Then, after a long pause, she said, "So, now that the cafe is up and running, what's next for Jason Carter?" Jason thought about that for a moment. For the longest time, his life had been about surviving, about getting by. But now he was finally living. Jason looked at Emily, meeting her gaze. "I guess that depends." Emily tilted her head. "On?" Jason smirked. "On whether or not you're free for dinner." Emily blinked, then laughed softly. "Are you asking me out, Carter?" Jason shrugged. "I'd say it's about time." Emily took another sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. "Well, considering I was the one who put you on this path, I suppose I should make sure you don't mess up the next." "Un part of your life," Jason chuckled. "That a yes?" Emily set her cup down, her smirk softening into something more real. "Yeah, Jason, that's a yes." Jason smiled, and just like that, his new life began. A few months later, on a quiet evening, Jason and Emily stood near the front window of Carter's Corner. The cafe was closed for the night, but tonight was special. The tables were set with warm plates of food. The coffee was fresh, and at those tables sat people who needed it the most. The homeless, the lost, the ones looking for a place to belong. Jason had made a promise to himself. If he ever got a second chance, he'd pay it forward. And now, he was keeping that promise. Emily stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. She glanced at Jason, then at the people in the cafe. "You did good, Carter." Jason exhaled, watching as one of the guests smiled over a hot meal. "I had a little help." Emily nudged him with her shoulder. "Only a little." Jason smirked. "You sticking around to see what I do next." Emily met his gaze, and for the first time Jason realized that she wasn't just passing through his life, she was part of it. Emily smiled. "Yeah, Jason, I'm sticking around." Jason nodded, feeling something settle deep in his chest. This was home. And for the first time in a long time, Jason Carter was exactly where he was meant to be. Wow, what a journey. From a single act of kindness to a life-changing second chance, Jason and Emily's story proves that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most beautiful endings. Now, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know where our incredible community is tuning in from. And here's a question for you. Do you believe in second chances? If you were in Jason's shoes, would you have accepted Emily's offer? Let us know your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this story and want more inspiring content like this, don't forget to like this video to let us know you want more, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Your support helps us bring more stories of love, kindness, and redemption to life. Finally, a huge thank you for watching and being part of this incredible community. Your engagement, your comments, and your support mean the world to us. Until next time, remember, one small act of kindness can change a life. See you in the next story.